Good morning for me and good evening for many of you, although I think it might be a good morning amongst our audience as well today. I'm delighted to be welcoming you to Thursday Book Club from La Rochelle in France, where I'll be until the end of January. For anyone who's new today, my name's Suzanne Leal. I'm the author of the novels The Deceptions, The Teacher's Secret and Border Street. As most of you all know, I started the Thursday Book Club during the 2020 COVID lockdown as a way of connecting readers and writers online. 2 years later, as many of you will also know, we've continued weekly on Zoom with a guest writer coming to join us each month. For more information, please go to my website, suzanneleal.com. Tonight, I'm really delighted to welcome Aoife Clifford as my guest. Aoife is a much-lauded crime writer whose first novel, All These Perfect Strangers, was longlisted for the Australian Book Industry General Fiction Book of the Year and the Voss Literary Prize, and whose second novel, Second Sight, was highly commended in the Davitt Awards. Her new novel is When We Fall. Welcome to you, Aoife.
Thanks, I'm delighted to be here.
Now, where are you coming from today, since we're all coming from slightly different areas today?
Oh, well, I'm here in a very wet, miserable Melbourne, it must be said. So it has poured down today and it will look like it's going to continue to pour down all through our Melbourne Cup long weekend. So,
of course, it's Melbourne Cup, isn't it?
Almost is, yeah.
Almost. Aoife, you sound very Australian, but your name betrays your Irish roots. So tell me about that.
Okay, well, I came to Australia when I was about 3. So in classic, I guess the usual Irish immigration story, times were tough in Ireland and my father couldn't get work and managed to apply for a job that was advertised in Ireland that took him to the other side of the world. So we arrived in Australia. I was 3, my younger sister was about 6 months. And we landed in Sydney, in public housing in Sydney, in one of those, not the huge tower blocks, but one of the smaller tower blocks where we were for a while. And then it was the New South Wales government policy to send some government departments out into the countryside, which I'm sure everyone would be aware that's policy from time to time, particularly if you're the Nationals, I think. But so my dad's government department got transferred out to Bathurst, and then they decided that was a bad policy and they didn't transfer out any others other than maybe one to Orange, I think. So we ended up in Bathurst when I was about 4, which I'm sure most people listening to this would know where that is. But if you don't, it's just the other side of the Blue Mountains and has the claim to fame of being Australia's oldest inland settlement. And so that's where I grew up. And from there then went and studied at ANU and then came to Melbourne for work about almost 25 years ago and haven't left. So that's it in a nutshell.
We were just talking together before everybody else came onto Zoom today and realised that we both qualified as lawyers and worked in different areas of the law before coming to writing. The reason I asked that question of Aoife is because of her protagonist, Alex Tillerson, who's a city barrister who returns to her hometown to care for her mother. And she's a protagonist in Aoife's new book, When We Fall. Where is Alex's hometown, Aoife?
Well, I tend to, coming from a country town myself, I tend to write about fictitious country towns because I always feel a bit worried. I'd be very sad if a poor country town appeared in a novel and was only known for a terrible, vicious murder happening in it, as opposed to being a good place to live. So I tend to make up fictitious country towns, but this one bears a strong resemblance to some of the country towns that are on the Great Ocean Road or just a little bit before the Great Ocean Road in Victoria. So it's a coastal town and it is relatively small and is in general a very nice place to live, except for the fact that foot ends up on a beach and my protagonist Alex, who's a barrister but times are a bit quiet in the bar, and she's here trying to look after her mum, gets drawn into what's happened and why is this foot on the beach.
I'm just going to stop you there. There's a foot on the beach. Now that says in one sentence what really belies a fabulous opening scene. I'm wondering if you can just paint the picture for us as to what's happening when this foot emerges.
Well, Alex is walking along the beach with her mum, but in fact they're walking quite separately because Alex is grappling with the fact that Denny, her mother, is in the early stages of dementia, which is something that Denny had kept from her and Alex has only discovered recently, and is in kind of, I'm sure probably most people have had experiences of maybe older family members with dementia or knowing someone with dementia, but I've experienced that in my family. And there is kind of that early stages where you're kind of sure but not sure, and you're kind of trying to fool yourself that things are actually going to be okay, and that maybe it's not as bad as you think, and you're kind of grappling with the reality. And Alex is in that stage because her mum is still at the stage where most of the time she seems fine, and then all of a sudden we'll go through a bad patch where things seem a bit definitely a bit worse and the memory's not as good. But then you kind of, even out of frustration, can sometimes feel that maybe they're putting it on a bit, or surely they do remember that, or they have good days, they have bad days, maybe they'll have more good days, or maybe there's some medication. So it's sort of all that kind of angstiness of it. And Alex and her mother have had, her mother's a pretty prickly sort of person, a very independent person, and both of them have sort of lived their lives quite separately to each other. And it's sort of a realization that things might have to change in the future, that there's going to be caring involved, and how do we take care of her properly, which Alex, as a dutiful daughter, is very concerned about, but also knows that her mother would really hate that. So they're having a whole kind of quiet, silent battle about what reality is going to be. And so Denny's actually marched off up the beach and not talking to Alex at all. And Alex is sort of there looking at the sea, thinking, God, life's pretty rubbish at the moment, because Alex herself is kind of a bit at the crossroads of her career. Her career's going south a bit. She's recently separated from her husband, who's also a barrister. And she's a bit afraid that it looks like she's going to lose her career along with her divorce, that he's going to be the person who ends up getting briefed and looked after, and just she's going to be the one who gets shunted out a little bit. So life's pretty rubbish, and she's standing on the beach when her mum kind of waves excitedly at the end of the beach to her. And so she goes up to see what her mum's waving about, and it turns out that it's a severed foot that her mother's discovered on the beach, sitting in a sort of bed of seaweed.
And from there, the narrative takes off. Where did you get the idea for the severed foot? There have, of course, been severed foots recently in the or feet.
It's notorious
media.
Notorious severed foot. That actually, when the minute that happened, I thought, oh no, here we go, because my book was already written by that stage.
Yes.
And I thought, I'm going to get asked a lot of questions about, did I base this on a certain financial planner in Sydney, which of course I hadn't. But the reason there's a severed foot in that case, and there's a severed foot in my book, is that it's reasonably plausible. So it actually comes about from some research I did for my second book, which was called Second Sight. And for part of that, I chatted to a really fabulous woman who was a forensic anthropologist about her job. And I loved, she was such a fascinating person to talk to and very generous with her time, that I actually put a forensic anthropologist in my second book just because she was just so awesome. And one of the things we were talking about is she's the person who gets called out in Victoria if they find remains. And there's a whole process when you find remains, because of course the remains can mean something sinister, or they can just mean they can be historic remains, in which case you don't want to disturb them, you want to leave them in the place if you can. And so there's a whole protocol around that. But she was explaining to me that some of the hardest remains to sort of know what to do with is when you find something just like a foot. And so you don't have the context around that foot. If it's just washed up, that gives you some explanation and some ability to identify. So I was quite interested in that as an idea. And one of the reasons that we're getting feet in particular washing up is what can happen is bodies that go into the water for any reason, any drownings, say, suicide or something like a murder. Because of the nature of sneakers are more buoyant these days than what they used to be. So generally a body will fall to the floor of the ocean and might not get discovered at all. But what they're finding is the buoyancy of sneakers means that as the body decays, it can fall apart. But what's kept buoyant is the shoe and what's in the shoe. So a foot will often be quite well preserved in the shoe, whereas the rest of the body might get nibbled on by fish and the like. So I thought when she was telling me all this, that a plausible beginning to a story would be finding the foot and working out what to do next with it. In my case, to actually help with that identification process, that foot has a tattoo, which means that it's not a hard identification process because it's a local person to the town. And so people realise who it is very quickly. But in some cases, it takes a lot longer, and sometimes they might never be identified just through foot.
That's fascinating. What's interesting, so Aoife, you would say that you're a crime fiction writer. Would you say that? Or literary crime? How would you?
Yeah, probably literary crime, I'd say, yeah.
So with crime, often you see a procedural, and often a procedural will involve a police investigation. Now, for you, what you've done instead is to use a lawyer as your protagonist. What interested you about having a lawyer in this position? And the investigator, really. She's the one that undertakes a lot of
driving that thing. Well, I guess, like you mentioned before, I have a legal background, like you have a legal background. So it's something that interests me. I was quite interested in each of my 3 books so far. The law has featured in some way. In my second book, it was a solicitor. In my first book, it was a law student. So it's a useful way because I guess, not to look at things in a traditional way, but kind of to come in at a different angle. I'm quite interested in the law, but I like situations where it's not your traditional courtroom, because I like kind of shining a bit of light on the fact that what happens outside the courtroom can really affect what happens inside the courtroom, or the decisions made outside the courtroom can really affect justice before even charges are laid, so that whole idea of how the justice world actually works in practice when you're having to deal with things like budgets and overworked and too many cases and all that sort of thing. I find those sort of stories that, like, not that kind of clear kind of running where it's, it's wigs at 10 paces and, a witness breaking down on the stand and admitting their guilt, whatever it is, those kind of tropes that we know. Well, the law's a lot more complicated than that. And I'm interested in that. I probably realized I wasn't going to be the world's greatest lawyer because, as you would remember, we have to read a lot of court cases, a lot of judgments when you're studying law. And I was always way more interested in the 5 sentences of facts that were at the top of the judgments than I was in the 20 pages of legal reasoning that followed them. And so I'm sort of the reasons why I studied law in the first place is the reason why I write and enjoy crime fiction, is those questions about, what is justice? What happens when people bear responsibilities on crimes but would never get charged for those responsibilities because legal responsibility is different from, say, moral responsibility? Where do we draw those sort of lines? So all of those things are things I'm perennially interested in, and so it's reflected in my work.
It's my theory that a lot of lawyers are really artists or frustrated artists who haven't had either the confidence or the risk-taking personality to jump straight into creative arts. So I know a lot of people who have begun their career in law because, as you say, it's a career of stories and it's a career of facts that you need to address to the law. But more and more, when I speak to fellow writers, they've started their life as lawyers. Did you find that amongst your friends group or your writer groups?
Absolutely. In fact, I was I was emceeing a panel, and it was Anna George, Alex Hammond, and Mark Brandy.
Mhm.
And I'm good friends with Anna. I know Alex, and I know Mark. And so I had to say at the start of my panel, I said, I've got a law degree. Anna, you've got a law degree. Alex, I know you've got a law degree. And I said, Mark, what the heck have you been doing with your life? Where's your law degree? To which he said, well, I started a law degree, but then I just decided to swap over to criminology. And he just went, oh my God. Like, so there's a lot of lawyers, especially end up writing in general. I kind of have a bit of a different idea. I think it is because a lot of us, a lot of lawyers were good at English at school and love books and love reading, which is lucky you love reading. There's a lot of reading when you're a lawyer. And so I think it sort of stems from that. And then you get into law and realize it's not as creative and fun. So it's sort of, you need to do that for the step to realize that isn't giving you the passion in life that you sort of hoped for, that it sort of is a bit more rote and a bit more constrained than you hoped, that you would be writing these impassioned judgments or these wonderful speeches or great oratory or whatever, and then realize it's actually just a heck of a lot of paperwork. And sort of, you need, most people want a creative outlet, and because we were all loved English and books, that's a natural progression for us, I think.
An interesting thing that I did before we left for La Rochelle was to be part of this program called Writing Better Judgments by the National Judicial College of Australia. And what it is that it's a way to teach judges how to write more interesting and more issues-based judgments. So
that is fascinating.
It's terrific. Yeah. And what the organisers do, I think very cleverly, is that they employ judges to teach the course, but they also employ writers to be part of the group. So everyone's divided into small groups, and you have a judge and a writer who then sort through how a judgment that's been sent in earlier can be changed to become more interesting, more issues-based, more succinct. And
brilliant.
It really is that intersection between the creative force and the legal mind, which
absolutely, because it's so important, because I mean, I've had in my professional life, you analyze the judgments, and some of them were so unclear. There were a couple of sentences that we couldn't work out whether they're saying yes or no to something that we then were trying to then put practically on it. And it was almost like you wanted to ring up the judge and say, is that a yes or is that a no on this aspect of law that we're now having to apply into practice? And we really need to know which one way it is. So that is well, good on them for organising that. That is one of the smartest things I've heard in the law for quite some time. I think that's brilliant.
I came out of it feeling absolutely buoyant because I could put both my talents, or my skills at least, to
absolutely
writing decisions and writing creatively.
Brilliant. I love it. That's great.
Aoife, we were speaking before about how you came to writing and also from law. You worked in industrial relations for some time. What saw the jump from that to creative writing or to fiction writing?
Oh, easy. It was kids. So I was at home on extended mat leave by that stage. I'd had 2 babies, and I would go on to have a third, but I wasn't quite having the third yet. And I realised that I was forgetting how to spell and to write full sentences. And I thought, God, you're going to have to do something about this. This is shocking. There's that classic, young kids where your heart expands, but parts of your brain begin to atrophy, I think. Anyway, so I thought, right, I'm setting myself a New Year's resolution. I'm going to write a short story. And it was something that I always wanted to do and hadn't sort of gotten around to it. So I thought, oh, well, what are you going to write about? And it's always that idea of writing about what you know. And there was a competition that's still running. And if people are, there are women here who are writers who want to sort of have a competition to aim for. It's the Sisters in Crime Scarlet Stiletto, which is a great competition. It's been running for oh God, probably 20 something years now. And so many people have gone on to write novels who have won prizes in it. Anyway, so they seem to have a real sense of humor and fun about it. But made it sound like it was a great thing. And it was sort of one of those things where I just knew instinctively that I could write a crime short story. I kind of understood how crime fiction worked, and I was confident in that. And so I thought, oh, well, so it's got to be a murder, clearly. And then, well, what would I set the murder place in? I thought, oh, well, I'm on the kinder committee of my kids' kinder, so I'm going to set it in the kinder committee, because at the time we had monthly meetings and it was all volunteers. And so volunteers can tend to, the meetings could often go off the rails, go way too long. So they would go from 7:30 at night to sometimes after 11, because it was a group of women who thought it was very important that everyone got to speak. And then by that stage, I would be absolutely furious, because all of us, nobody was getting a full night's sleep at this stage. We all had babies at home, and I was just ropeable. So rather than want to kill my fellow lovely volunteers, I used to plan my murder while I was sitting there waiting for someone to stop talking about whatever they were talking, and look around the room and try and find good murder weapons. Anyway, so I wrote that short story and I won the competition. And that was basically all the encouragement I needed to be here 15 years later, still writing.
And what's your writing technique, or what's your writing routine? Do you write every day? Do you write when you can? How do you manage it?
It's probably more when I can. And that routine will change markedly depending on how serious I'm being about something, about having to get something out. So, for example, at the moment, I'm relatively serious because I'm working on another book, and we're just starting to talk deadlines. And I'm a person who deadlines really focus my mind in a way that when they're absent, I can just dilly-dally nonstop. So at the moment, I work in a bookshop a couple of days a week, so I don't give myself any writing to be done on those days. But on the days that I'm not, my goal is to get 1,500 words done. And so that is enough for me to start seeing real progress and to know where I'm going. But particularly when I'm starting a project, I will, it takes me quite a while to get going and to be confident about a story and to know it's got legs to be a novel. And so I would take quite a while to kind of hunting around for my story. And then once I've got it clear in my mind, I've got the characters, I've got the setting, I've got a fair idea of what's happening. I often won't know how it ends though. I won't know necessarily who the murderer is. But if I'm feeling confident in the rest of it, then I can push through for the first draft. And then once that's done, I sigh a big feeling of relief, because now I've got something to play with and shape, and I'm a great editor and re-editor. That's where I feel super confident about. First drafts make me a wee bit nervous until I'm really confident about them.
Yeah, I find first drafts almost impossible. I mean, it's like dragging it out of you. Whereas once I've got a canvas to work on, which I see as a first draft, things then seem to fly, or at least
much better.
Walk fast.
Yeah. Progress. Get past that place. Yeah.
You mentioned that you work at a bookstore. I'm interested in that decision. How long have you been a bookseller for, and what drew you to bookshops?
Well, it was the classic of, I'm just trying to remember when it was. I think it's about 5 years ago now, I think. It was sort of, I had been out of the workforce for a long time by that stage, because I had gone into writing, but as we all know, it's very hard to make a full-time living out of that. And I'd done other things, and it was easier to kind of justify being at home when there was still someone at home with me, kind of thing. So writing was still the side project. But then they all got to school, and then that first year my first book came out, so that was kind of what kept me going. But then it was a sort of between my first and second book. Once the second book was done, it was sort of like maybe I needed to get back into the real world a bit rather than just my own imaginary world at home. And so it was just one of those things that came up on a writing group in Facebook page, and it's not too far from where I live. And I literally thought, my God, you've been out of the workforce so long. This is literally all you're qualified for, is a writing adjacent job. And so, and this could be good, because not only like, do you know crime fiction, obviously, quite well-known literary fiction and adult fiction in general, but also I had pretty good children's fiction knowledge as well. So I thought, oh, bugger it, I'll just go in and give it a go, because it was school hours. And you thought, oh my God, like jobs that are school hours, they're like hen's teeth. So I thought I'm just going to give it a go. So I really didn't know what to expect, but I actually really enjoy it. Like I really, I definitely think it has affected my writing in that I've got a much better idea of audience and what people want, or even if I'm making a choice that is still a choice, there's something I want to do, I'm more confident in those decisions that I know some things it'd be more commercial if I didn't do that, or whatever it is, but I'm doing that with knowledge as opposed to guessing. I'm much better at all the understanding the way publishing works, because I see the end result of it. So I know what's important to get done along with my book, not just my book, but the things that surround it. I know intimately what's out there in the marketplace and what there is way too much of already, so don't go down that path. So it's been really great, but probably the thing that's greatest about it is I get to talk to people who are readers every, 2 days out of every week, and I'd chat away to customers. And I mean, there's a lot of booksellers that are quite shy, retiring people, like there are writers, but that's not me. I'm a chatty person. And so I love chatting to people and asking them about their choices and talking about books I've read. And as a result, because I work in a little independent bookshop, people come in expecting that level of service where you're constantly giving recommendations and you're constantly talking about new books. And there's an expectation that you've read quite a lot, which I love doing anyway. And in fact, so my third book was in a small way inspired by a conversation I had with a customer at work. And so she came in, and when you're in a bookstore, you have give a generalization, you have two types of customers. And the most common customer is they're a strong reader and they come in regularly and they get books. And then you have another type of customer who's not a strong reader, but they've got a strong passion in one particular area. So they're only interested in that area to get books about this. And this customer was that second type of category person. And her passion was fashion. Now, I don't have much interest in fashion at all, but she was really into it. So we started chatting about it because I love hearing about people's passions about things. I really enjoy getting an insight into their lives and how it works for them. And so she was telling me about, and we started talking about books about fashion and memoirs about, there was a memoir of Alana Hill, Butterfly and a Pin. At the time, we were talking about what a great book that was. And so just, everyday conversation. And she said, well, you do strange things, like you just fall in love with pieces of fashion. And I fell in love with this dress that I saw 15 years ago in a shop in Melbourne. And she said, and I found a picture of it in a magazine and I cut it out. And I've moved 3 times since then. And every time I move, I think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Should I just throw this magazine out? Why am I keeping this picture of the dress? But she said, but it just really speaks to me. I just love that dress. And so I said, oh, well, describe it for me, this amazing dress. And so she started describing it. And she said, I just really wish I'd found out what had happened to it and who ended up with it. And I said, well, I can tell you who ended up with it, because the dress you described is my wedding dress.
No way. Really?
Yeah, really. So I brought in a photo of my wedding dress. And the reason why it's quite distinctive, because I got married in a red dress. And there's not that many red wedding dresses out there. So that's how I could identify it. Sure enough, it was the same dress. And so 15 years later, I was able to finish the story for her of the dress that she had been wondering about for the last 15 years. And in fact, she came in a couple of years later and said, would I mind? But she would like to get an oil painting made of my dress so that she can hang it on the wall and have it forever. And I said, of course. So one day I'm hoping that she comes back and says the painting, she was going to have to save up for the oil painting, she told me, because and so one day I hope that I might go wear my wedding dress and get to see an unveiling of it. So it was such a crazy story. It stayed with me. And one of the things that I took out of it is that I'm a words person. but she was a visual person, and it was the visual things that were really important to her. And she spoke a visual language that I don't really speak. When I have a problem, I will think about, I should really read a book on that subject. Or if I have kind of issues that I'm interested in, I'll write a book about it so that I can work out how I feel about them. But I thought, well, what if you had a protagonist who was a words person like me, but then was thrown into a world where all the clues for what's going on are visual clues. And it's like having to talk a different language. And so that is the basis of, how I got my story of my book, because that's exactly what happens to my protagonist, who is a lawyer, a words person, and all of a sudden she's faced with a foot with a tattoo on it, and the tattoo means something and she doesn't really know what, but she's going to try and find out.
Oh, that's so interesting. I'm mindful of the time. What I'm going to do as well, I'm going to give everyone here a chance to add to the chat section if you've got any questions for Aoife. Sometimes people do, sometimes people don't. So I'll just give a little bit of time for the audience to pop some chat questions in. While we're waiting for that, can you describe the wedding dress? I'm fascinated now.
Oh, I should have. I haven't got a picture of it in this room. So it is, the dress itself had a bit of a story. So once again, because I was not a fashion person, I was dilly-dallying about going to get a wedding dress because I just could not be bothered with the faff. And I have got 3 sisters, all of them are way more interested in fashion than I am. And one of them came to visit and said, that's it, I'm taking you wedding dress shopping. I'm not listening to any more of your excuses. Your wedding's coming up, you still don't have a dress. And so I went, oh, whatever. And so she said, where do you want to go? And I said, oh, well, I like Mariana Hardwick. I've seen like it from the tram, like it was on Brunswick Street at the time. And I used to catch the tram near there and I used to see it and thought, oh yeah. So she said, okay, we'll go there. So we went on the tram, hopped into Mariana Hardwick. And she had said to me, well, what sort of dress do you want? And red's my favourite colour, and I really was not going to get married in a white dress. So I had said red, but sort of as a bit of a joke, to be honest. And so we walked in the door and she turned to the corner and went, oh my God, that's your dress at the end of this corridor. And sure enough, it was. It was on a mannequin all made up and it was there. And I went, oh my God, that's my wedding dress. So it was a strapless red dress that was kind of fitted bodice and then went out into a full skirt, and it had these black roses sort of appliqued on it. And the reason that it was there at all was that Mariana Pryor had worn it for an opera event, and they'd made it for her as a kind of promotional kind of thing. And then it had come back and they sort of didn't know what to do with it because, so they sort of had it as this kind of artwork a bit rather than really expecting anyone to come buy it. But anyway, I said, oh, can I try it on? Like, oh, sure. And it completely fitted. So I bought Marina Pryor's opera dress for basically half price for a Mariana Hardwick wedding dress.
Oh,
so that's the dress.
Do you think the oil painting will be with you in it?
No, she showed me some examples of, that was the other thing, because in my book there's a lot of artwork, because it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole of there's all sorts of people doing all sorts of reproductions of things, and this person makes her money. She does her own paintings, but what sort of keeps her going is she paints things for pieces of clothing that people are important to people. So it's literally just the clothing. Wow. So they can be hanging on a hanger or whatever, but an important thing for the person. So there's all sorts of, it's that classic of artists, having to make a living, end up painting what's important to people and taking commissions and stuff like that. So she hasn't come back in. This was a pre-COVID kind of thing, but I'm really hoping one day she comes back in.
Oh, it's a great story. Before we leave, you're a bookseller, you're a writer, you're a reader. We're all readers. What should we read?
Well, this has been a cracker year for books in general. So if you take last year, for example, Sarah Winman's Still Life was really a dominant book throughout the industry. This year, while there's some dominant books, it's not to the same level as Sarah Winman. I think she really hit a spot of an ability to escape to Italy while we were all stuck in various lockdowns or whatever else. So what I love is there's lots of great books out there to read, and any good bookseller would, of course, ask people what their favourite books are first to try and find the perfect book for them. But I would recommend two that are very recent books. So Camilla Shampsey's Best of Friends. If you've read Camilla Shampsey's Home Fire, which is an excellent book, a really great book club book, because there's so much to discuss and to disagree and to kind of tease out. This isn't kind of the same explosiveness or as full-onness as that book is, which deals a lot with terrorism and the effects of terrorism, but is genius. But still, she's great at a sentence level, and it's a book about two friends that begins in the 80s in Pakistan and then goes into London in a sort of more present day. And it follows the trajectory of their friendship. And particularly the stuff in Pakistan, I would have been happy to stay in Pakistan for the whole book. It's so fascinating. The interactions with Western culture. It's about it's just before Benazir Bhutto gets in, and that happens within the book. And so it's a huge time for Pakistani history. So that's absolutely great to sort of revisit and think about and to learn more about. So that's a really great book. I would really recommend that to you. I'm going to give you three books, actually, because I'm a greedy bookseller. I loved Kate Atkinson's Shrines of Gaiety, so something totally different. If you're just looking for escapist, brilliantly written, fun book, it's 1920s Soho nightclub setting, and it's just, she is such a witty, funny, enjoyable writer, and this is a romp of a book. So it's a lovely holiday read for people if you just want to, escape into a different world, but it's enjoyable, but stakes aren't high. And then about to come out is Gary Dish's new book, which is in his Hirsch series. And I just think I got a chance to read an early advance of it. You would do a lot worse to read his book that comes out each year and follow the social, you can follow the social kind of way Australia's tracking through his novels, because they're so timely and really about what's happening right now. So for example, Hirsch in the country town is having to deal with COVID, mask wearing, and the rise of Nazism, all through a country town perspective. And it's just, I think he's this kind of the social chronicler of our times. So I would really recommend it.
He's a terrific, I interviewed Gary Disher last year. He's terrific, isn't he? I mean, he's so measured and funny and wry, and that all reflects itself in his writing as well, I think.
Yeah, he's a lovely guy. He was actually my mentor for my first book. So
yeah, lucky you.
Yeah, super lucky, and he made all the difference. It was brilliant. He saved me from some very big mistakes. There's some classics, like I had a blue sash in a black and white picture, and so he picked up structural issues, and he picked up minor issues and made my book infinitely better.
Oh, fantastic. And that's the first one. That's All These Perfect Strangers.
Yeah.
Excellent. We've got a comment from Gillian, who loved the wedding dress story. I love the wedding dress story too. And we've got a question. I'm the person who's only identified as iPhone has got a hand up. Now, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question, this is a good time. And while I'm waiting, here we go. I'll ask you to unmute. We'll see how we go. Okay. Look, otherwise, if that's difficult, we'll just ask you to pop your question into the chat, and if that doesn't work, then if we have a question that isn't answered here, are you happy for me to email you and
of course
get the answer?
Absolutely, delighted to.
It's me. It's Dina speaking.
Oh, hi, Dina.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I don't know. I'm on my phone, so that's why it didn't quite show me. But I wanted to ask: is it Aoife? Is that how I pronounce the name?
That's how you say it. Yep.
Aoife, what is your writing practice? How do you arrange, you have young children, and you're a lawyer. How do you arrange time and space for your writing?
Well, my children are older now, and that makes a big difference. So I started when they were young, and now they're much older and off doing their own thing. So that made all the difference to me. Like if I had my if I got my preference, I would be writing sort of first thing in the morning. That works for me. And at the moment, I have to stay there until I've got my 1,500 words. And so however long that takes. On a good day, I will get that done in the morning, and that might give me some time in the afternoon then just to think more generally about it. Suzanne, I don't know if it's the case for you, but when you're kind of in the zone of writing a novel, ideas come at you all the time. And I often find my best ideas come to me while I'm like doing things like the wash up or something like that. And all of a sudden you'll get that moment of going, that's my solution. So in fact, my first, I can distinctly remember for my first novel, I was trying to work out what it would be about. And I'm someone, I really love structure in general in books. I like interestingly structured books to read. And each of them in different ways, my books are structured in ways that is not at all important to the reader, I don't think, but is really, really important to me, some of the structural decisions that I took. So I'm really taking them on my behalf and then spend my time disguising it so other people don't notice. But that first book, I was really thinking about how a lot of crime novels are structured as it's the stranger going into the small community, and why that works so well. So like, you know, your Poirot, your Marple, you're often separate to the community and you go in and then a murder happens, or that's the reason why you're called in. And why does that work so well? And the reason why it works so well is because if you're someone who's part of the community, then you might decide it's better off not to know who did the murder, especially if other murders seem to be occurring because of your investigation. Whereas if it's a stranger, there's kind of this implicit promise that you will get to the end and get the answer, which of course is important in crime novels. And then while I was doing the wash up one day, I thought, well, what would happen if everybody was a stranger? Could you write a crime novel where everyone's a stranger coming in, and you've got no basis of who to trust, who not to trust, what's their backstory, you haven't known them all your life. Could you make a novel like that work? And so I thought, well, how would you set it up so that would actually a whole bunch of strangers would get together with no sort of backstory? And then I thought, oh, well, that was for me because I left home to go to uni. That was what first year uni was like, where a whole bunch of strangers being chucked together. And then we had to get to know each other during the process of it. But that classic of when you're that young, you know, you instantly become best friends with someone just because they happen to be sitting next to you in a lecture or whatever. And then that might not work, or that might work, or whatever. So anyway, so that was one of my wash up ideas, was that'd be an interest. I couldn't think of a crime novel that had used that as a structure. And so I thought I'd give it a go. And that was the basis of my first novel. So I like to have the time to think about, to be able to have a bit of distance from your work, as well as being really involved in the minutiae, then sort of putting it in the back of your mind. And when I'm writing a novel, it's always there, just ticking over in the back of my mind, trying to work things through.
Thank you. That was a really full answer. Thanks, Aoife.
No problem.
Terrific. Look, Aoife, thank you so much for your time today. What a fascinating conversation it's been. Can I recommend everybody that you read When We Fall, Aoife's third book, and when you finish that, All These Perfect Strangers, and then when you want more, Second Sight. So, as I understand it, we might well have a fourth book awaiting us in the near future. So we'll wish you the best of luck with that. Thank you again, Aoife, for your time.
Lovely. It's been a delight. I hope everyone has a lovely evening, or in your case, a really beautiful day ahead of you on the other side of the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.